Welcome to the Homeless System Simulation. This brief video will walk you through how to play the simulation. There's no need to do anything while the video is running. Your instructor will pause the video when it's time for you to do something. This is the initial layout of the game. It includes several game boards. Each game board comes with cards that are held together by rings. There are two boxes, one for market housing and one for unsheltered homelessness. And there's a bag with several beads and several bags of beads, including clear and red beads. The first step for you will be to take out the game boards and hand them out to the game participants in the following order. Your instructor will pause the video now. Each of the game boards also comes with a set of cards. The system event cards goes with the scorekeeper's game board. All other sets of cards should be clearly marked to go with the game board. The instructor will pause the video now and allow you to hand out the sets of cards for each player. After every player has their game board and cards, the next step will be to set up the beads on the game boards. You should take the bag labeled Startup Beads and place beads on the game board per the instructions that are at the bottom left of every game board. The scorekeeper and intake do not have any beads that they place at the start of the game. Jenny's board is the Permanent Supportive Housing board. The instructions say to place 12 red beads and 8 clear beads on the board. So she pulls the beads out of the bag labeled Game Startup Beads and places them on her board. Then she hands the bag over to the next player. Jenny will place one bead in each of the boxes on her board. It doesn't matter what order the clear and red beads go in. Also, she'll have some empty spaces at the end, and it doesn't matter where those empty spaces are on the board. Your instructor will pause the video now to give everybody a chance to place their startup beads on their game boards. Now that everybody's set up their beads, the game boards should look something like this. We'll play through part of the first round to give you a sense of how the game is played. Before a round begins, every player should turn to the card that corresponds with the round they're on. Each round begins with the reading of the system event card. The first system event card says, "No additions, no conversions." We'll explain in a little while what it means to do an addition or a conversion. Next up is intake. Jenny will hand the beads to Ed for round 1, and Ed will place them on his intake board. Try to spread the beads out evenly among the columns, except in the first round you won't be using the diversion column. We'll explain what that means later. Ed's done a great job here of spreading the beads out among the different columns. You don't have to be too picky about getting the exact amount of beads the same in each column. While the intake player is putting the beads on the intake board, everybody should read what it says on round 1 of their cards. The cards' instructions are divided up into 2 sections, program rules and exits. Here's the intake game card for round 1. You'll notice it has one program rule, which is to take the round 1 beads and spread them evenly across the columns, which we've already done. And it has 3 exit instructions, which we'll demonstrate now. The first instruction is to exit column D to emergency shelter if there is space. Ed will take the beads from column D, and then he'll talk to Julie, who's running the emergency shelter, to find out how much space she has. Julie has 5 open beds. Ed will take 5 beads and give them to Julie to place in emergency shelter. The rest of the beads just stay in column D on the intake board. The next instruction is to take column E and place those beads in unsheltered homelessness. So Ed will take all the beads in column E and place them in the bin that says Unsheltered Homelessness. The last instruction is to move the rest of the beads to wherever there's space, and if there's no space, to move to Unsheltered Homelessness. Ed is communicating with the other players at the table to see who has space for additional beads. It's important for the rest of the players to look at their game cards to make sure that they can take the beads that Ed's sending. When there's no space left in any of the game boards on the table, Then Ed will place the rest of the beads into the Unsheltered Homelessness bin. Next up is Emergency Shelter. The first exit instruction is to exit 1.5 columns to market housing, but there's also a program rule that says you shouldn't exit red beads to market housing. So Julie's going to take the clear beads in 1.5 columns to put them into the market housing bin. One little note here, if you have an uneven number of rows, so splitting a column in half would mean splitting one of the beads in half, you can just use your judgment about how many beads constitute half the column. The next instruction is to exit 1.5 columns to Unsheltered Homelessness. In this case, you can exit the red beads to Unsheltered Homelessness, so Kate helps her out by moving that one red bead that Julie missed. The last instruction is to exit the remaining beads to wherever there's space. Unfortunately, there's no space left on any other game board. The next board is Rapid Rehousing. And Rapid Rehousing has 2 instructions. Exit 3 columns to Market Housing, which you see Kate doing here, and exiting 1 column to Emergency Shelter, but if there's no space in Emergency Shelter, then those beads go to Unsheltered Homelessness. Since there's no space in Emergency Shelter, Kate's going to place those beads in Unsheltered Homelessness. The last board we'll look at is Outreach. Outreach has just 1 instruction, to place beads wherever there's space. Ian looks around and notices there's plenty of space in Emergency Shelter. So he takes all his beads and gives them to Julie to place in Emergency Shelter. One quick note about Outreach. While the other game boards can receive beads from either intake or from other players, Outreach can actually take beads from the Unsheltered Homelessness bin. The round ends with the scorekeeper tallying up the score for each round. Here Andre is writing down the number of people in Emergency Shelter and Transitional Housing, which he'll do at the end of each round. He'll count the number of people in the Unsheltered and Market Housing bins only at the very end of the game. Beginning in round 2, you'll have some system event options. There are 3 kinds of system events: adding a program, opening the diversion column, and converting a program. We'll start by showing you how to add a new program. First, take out the game board that says Extra that was included with your game boards. Give it to the person whose program type you're adding. This table has decided to add a new Rapid Rehousing program. So they'll give the board to Kate, who is running the Rapid Rehousing program. The next time it's Kate's turn, she'll just play as if she has 20 extra beds in her program. A quick note here, you get 20 extra beds no matter which program type you add, and you cannot add a new intake program. Next we'll show how to open the diversion column. If you decide to open the diversion column, when you place your beads on the intake board, you spread them out across all the columns, including the diversion column. Ed will demonstrate. For the rounds that you have the diversion column open, you can move all the beads from the diversion column into Market Housing. Next we'll look at how to convert a program. This table has decided to convert a transitional housing program into a rapid rehousing program. The first step is that Darcy will take a pen and cross out the title of the board, Transitional Housing, and write in Rapid Rehousing. When the next round of the game is played, and Kate reads the cards for Rapid Rehousing, Darcy will play along to the same instructions. A few final notes about the simulation. The simulation is obviously a very simplified version of how homeless assistance actually works. However, it was designed using actual data for outcomes of strategies in different communities across the country. As you play the simulation, you should think about how it's similar to and different from homeless assistance in your community. That concludes the video. You're now ready to play.